340 kilometres northwest of Port Augusta, and it's just north of the township of Kingunya. And Pernatty Station is about 150 k's north of Port Augusta. Both of these extensive sheep stations can be described fairly generally as open canopod plains country, and I've added some photos in the background just to get an idea of the context of the type of country that we're talking about where these trials are being held. The pastures in this country type are dominated by salt bushes, blue bushes, and a mixture of grasses and sclerulinas, of course. On Northwell, the soils at this trial site are sort of loamy and little stony, and slightly heavier clays on the Pernatty site. Next slide, thanks, Bianca. So as you would have seen in the, I just saw Bianca's face cringe because she saw herself come up on the screen. I think it's a beautiful shot. So we'll hear about two different trials this afternoon, and I thought I would take this opportunity to introduce the research team that are behind the trials. So on the left of the screen is Bianca. Bianca works at Turretfield for SARDI. Megan Lewis is on the right. Megan is currently based in Wagga. She's doing a PhD with the University of Adelaide. And then the middle is Sam Connor, who's currently sitting in New South Wales. Thanks for joining us, Sam. And Sam's doing an honours project with Charles Darwin University. I'd also like to acknowledge Ben and Laura and their team at Pernatty, and also Toby and Shona and their team from Northwell Station. And thank you for allowing us to share the work that's happening in your patches. So without much further introduction, I think we'll kick straight into it. And the first project we'll hear about is from Megan. So over to you, Megan. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. Hello everyone. I'm Megan Willis. I'm a PhD student with the University of Adelaide, and I'm working on a project focused on virtual fencing in sheep and cattle. Up until about a month ago, I was employed as a research officer with SARDI. So you may have seen me present on behalf of SARDI before. So I'm going to give a little bit of an overview of virtual fencing and a bit of the background and why we undertook the trial at Pernatty with the virtual fencing collars before I hand over to Bianca to talk more about the results. So I'll start off by just giving a little bit of an overview of what virtual fencing is. So basically it's an agtech solution that uses GPS enabled collars to communicate the location of invisible GPS fences to livestock. So the way that works is the collar is connected to a base station in most cases, or sometimes the cellular network, and that enables communication between the collars and an online program. So within that online program, you can set virtual fences, track where your animals are using GPS, and the platform then communicates via the connectivity to the collars to preload where that fence is. So as the animals are moving around the paddock, they're GPS tracked against the fence. And as they move towards the fence, the collar delivers a series of cues to communicate to them that they're approaching a fence. So the way that those cues work is as the animal moves towards the fence, they will receive a beep as a warning signal to say the fence is close, you need to stop. If the animal chooses to move towards the virtual fence, it will receive a pulse. But if it doesn't move towards the virtual fence, if it stops, turns away, or any other action like that, it won't receive a pulse. And so over time, the animals learn, if I stop when I hear the beep, I won't get a pulse. And that's the way that the virtual fence contains them. So at the moment, in a commercial sense, there are devices out there for use in cattle. So there's a couple on the screen here, the top one being Gallagher eShepherd. and the bottom one being vents. So these are the two major devices in the beef space at the moment and that are relevant to rangeland systems. There is no commercial device for sheep in Australia yet. So that's sort of where some of this research has come in. So another important thing to note with virtual fencing is that it's at varying stages of commercialisation depending on which state you're in within Australia, and that's physical state, not mental state. So if you're in South Australia, it's still prohibited under the animal welfare regulations, but if you're in Western Australia, Queensland or Tasmania, there's commercial use. So recently, Victoria, New South Wales and South Australia have all had some kind of commitment by their governments to allow virtual fencing in the near future. So that's a really exciting step. But that just gives you an overview of sort of where it's at for cattle, where it's at for sheep, and sort of where you're at depending on where you're located in Australia. So why do this project? Specifically looking at Pernatty Station and the work we did with the virtual fencing. So, so there's been a little bit of previous work done in sheep. A lot of it started out with manual dog training collars, so manually applying an audio, manually applying a pulse, and visually doing that. Researchers doing that in a paddock with, like 4 sheep in it or something like that. So it started really, really small. And then over the last sort of 10 years, it's grown to the point where we were able to deploy virtual fencing devices on a sheep station. So SARDI had done some work testing the vents device, which is the grey one at the bottom of the screen, modified for sheep, and found that was successful at containing crossbred ewes and also excluding merino ewes from a sandhill on a crop stubble, but with challenges associated with using a modified cattle device that was not designed for sheep. So working from that, we wanted to test the device in a rangelands environment, and with a more hardy shedding breed to see how it might stand up against those conditions, and if it would work, a bit of a proof of concept. So go to the next slide. So these are just a couple of photos of what we deployed at Pernatty. It's a little bit tricky to see, but the animal there looking right at us on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see the collar sitting there and the chains that actually deliver the pulse. And then on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see the way that they're fitted to the animal. So a chain either side comes up and loops through a joining, like a bridge, a fabric bridge. And that's the way, then it's zip tied with heavy duty zip ties to either side. So that's the sort of device that we were deploying, just so for those who are more practically minded who would like to see what we actually were running, that's what it looked like. And so at Pernatty, what we did was deployed these devices on 100 ewes. Well, I think it was actually 98 ewes and 1 ram in the end, so 99. And what we did was put these ewes up on a water point in the north of Pernatty Station, because we really wanted to test whether we could keep the ewes on that water. And you'll hear a bit more from Laura and Ben about why they were interested in this tech later. But they're really interested in keeping them up there because they have that tendency to walk south into the weather. So we thought it'd be a really good test of the technology. So what we did was drew a virtual fence around a dam with a 5-kilometre radius. And Bianca will show you some photos of that when she talks about her results. But we really wanted to see how the animals, first of all, if we could contain them and how they moved around within that area. So yeah, we kept them in that area for 4 weeks after a brief training period. And then what we did was use the virtual fencing to try and help with the mustering process. So we brought the virtual fence in from a 5 kilometre radius to a 1 kilometre radius to kind of try and condense the sheep. And then immediately prior to going out and mustering, turned that virtual fence off and hoped that they would stay relatively condensed to be able to muster. So yeah, that's a bit of background, and that's what we were aiming to do. So I might now hand over to Bianca to chat about the results.
Hi guys, so I'm Bianca Agenbag from SARDI. I came along on this project with Megan just to get out there and put some collars on some sheep and see what we can find. So like Megan mentioned, we put these virtual fencing collars on 99 dorper ewes, but as she was talking about before, they have to learn how to actually respond to the collars. So a beep means you're getting close to the boundary, and then a pulse is you've crossed that boundary. So the first thing you need to do with these animals is actually train them to respond to these cues. So once the dorpers were collared, we moved them into a 100-hectare training paddock, which is the sort of white outline you can see on the screen right now. And then Vince drew a virtual fence boundary, which is that black and white line across the paddock that you can see there. So that virtual fence was designed to stop those animals from moving towards the south, which is what we know that they love to do, and to sort of keep them around that watering point. So you can see by looking at this, there's a lot of green, yellow and blue on the paddock there, and that is actually a GPS location heat map. So the yellow and green means that's where they spent a lot of time, and the blue means they didn't spend too much time there. So within the first 24 hours, we did have breaches of the virtual fence, which is completely expected as they're learning how to use this technology. So you can see there's quite a bit of yellow and green and blue sort of on the southern side of this paddock as they've breached the fence. But then Ben and Laura went on in the second day and pushed them back across that virtual fence boundary, and they seem to respect it a lot more from days 2 to 4. So at the end of day 4, they were all responding to the cues and no longer breaching that virtual fence, which means they can be moved to their next area, which was that dam in the northern side of the paddock. So on the left-hand side, we can see where the water point was, and that was called the North Eliza area. And then a virtual fence was drawn around that area in a circular pattern, just to try keep them contained to that watering point, but still give them plenty of room to graze, give them plenty of water to drink, and, you know, just areas to explore before they even interact with that boundary, but really to stop them from heading towards the south. On the right-hand side, I've put the GPS heat map on there. So again, you can see there's a lot of green and yellow going on around the watering point. They did graze within a few kilometres of that watering point. They explored a little bit of the northern side of this area that we were trying to contain them in, but they did really, really well actually staying within the virtual fence area for the month-long trial. Now, you can see there is a little bit of a heat map showing up on the side here, which is outside of the virtual fence border. And again, some did break through the virtual fence boundary, which, again, being a device that's not made for sheep, it can be expected for this to happen. And when we, went through the data, we saw that what actually happened here is a few collars could have fallen off because a few collars did not move location at all throughout a period of time, but there was no deceased animal spotted on that site. A few of them had a faulty collar, so that collar actually never connected for the entire period of time to the fence portal online, which can absolutely happen. And then a couple of them definitely just broke through the boundary and explored the farm as if they weren't wearing a virtual fence collar. But you do see some of them actually came back into the virtual fence boundary as well, which is what we'd like to see. And then hopefully they respect it before they leave it again. So we had a success rate of 90% of maintaining and containing the dorpers within this virtual fence boundary, which to us is a really high rate for collars that are not designed for sheep and really not been used on dorpers before. And also, yes, it's only 90%, but that is still a much, much higher containment rate than if they were not wearing virtual fence collars at all, if this technology wasn't employed, because then they would just absolutely go back to the south. So it showed us that for that month-long period, we were able to sort of keep them in the northern side of the paddock. And you can see they did spend a lot of time towards this sort of southeast border here, but there was really not many breaches for spending that much time around the boundary. Then once the month was over and we had to bring these animals in, I say we, Ben and Laura had to bring these animals in, the virtual fence was brought down to a 1 kilometre radius around the watering point. So the idea was there that the animals will go have a drink overnight and then we would capture them in that small area there. There is 3 virtual fence boundaries set up to try and capture all the animals. They're not all going to be around the water at night time. So it's just to sort of give you a little bit more area, a little bit more like a backup virtual fence, and then that would be turned off just before the mustering would occur. So I think this really helped with mustering. It definitely did not require a helicopter or an excessive team on the ground. It helped keep the animals together until the team was up there ready to muster them back down to the yard so we could remove the collars. And yeah, there was 90% of the animals. So all the animals that was in the virtual fence were able to be brought down into the yard so that we could remove their collars, bar that 10% that escaped earlier. I will pass on to Laura and Ben.
Hi everyone, how's it all going? I'll just get my notes up. Yeah, so when we were approached to participate in the trial, we said a big yes, as we believe the concept of virtual fencing could be very beneficial in pastoral areas. And we were interested in how the dorpers would respond to the virtual fence, as they are flighty in nature, and we currently do not have any internal fences on Pernatty, only holding paddocks. So the sheep run in family groups around watering points that they prefer. And historically, we end up with a lot of sheep on our southern end. And we need a cost-effective means to keep them on the northern watering point so the property is grazed sustainably. The trial was a success in our eyes, with around 90% of the ewes in a small radius around the watering point at mustering time. However, bigger improvements need to be made before it is an economically viable option going forward. So just some challenges that were given to the sheep within the 4 weeks was we actually had 15 millimetres of rain in a summer storm over that dam during the trial, so that put pressure on the sheep. We had a large mob of uncollared sheep mixed with the collared sheep, so that put pressure on them to want to move out of the virtual fence. And also, we only really gave them a short training period. I think we probably, in hindsight, should have given them a bit longer, but we had a lack of feed in the holding paddocks just to the dry conditions. And some benefits in the future, we believe, for dorpers and shedding breeds in the pastoral operations is that it's all about land weight gain. So if you can drive efficiency in that and have control over where they graze, management of grazing areas so we can spell country a lot easier, and we can have real-time data on sheep behaviour and better understand where they are when they are joining and lambing, as most operations that have dorpers are in open flocks, so the rams are in all year round. Another big one is cost savings in labour, etc. For mustering. You don't need as many people. Some of the cons that we observed was the technology is definitely not adapted yet for sheep. It was cattle collars on sheep, and it wasn't real-time tracking. So every 10 minutes it gave you a GPS location, which for a dorper ewe is too long. They can go a long way in 10 minutes. And it also hasn't been approved in South Australia, the government, so the technology won't be invested in by companies yet. And so until this occurs, the technology is probably not really going to move much forward with sheep. You also need 4G mobile phone service for each collar to work, and a lot of towers in hilly country. So the collar has to be able to see a tower to work. And they can only be used on mature sheep because the sheep grow so fast, so you can't put them on a young lamb. And the 10% that did breach the fence was a pretty big labour and time cost to locate, as we couldn't track them on the app because they went out of the tower range, and trying to track them down, it took quite a lot of labour and time. But overall, we believe that the virtual fencing in sheep is a technology that we pursue in the future. We can see the benefits being rewarded in other agricultural sectors such as the dairy industry and intensive grass feedlot systems in Tasmania. And so we have hope with this technology in arid pastoral areas in the future.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Laura, Ben and Ava. That was great to hear the perspective you guys of what it's like on the ground, what you saw. And as you said, this is such new and emerging tech, particularly for dorpers. So we really thank you and commend you for putting your hand up and getting involved. I think we might be getting some claps. So yeah, that was great feedback from everyone. Thank you. So that ties up the virtual fencing trial at Pernatty. And so now we're going to head slightly west and head out to Northwell Station, which is a different trial. And Toby, if it's okay with you, we might kick off with you just giving us a bit of a description of Northwell Station, and then we'll lead in with Samantha and some of her project mentions.
No worries at all. Oh, hey guys. Yeah, so quick summary of Northwell. So Northwell, we are 3,800 square kilometres, running merino sheep. We lamb down 7,500 ewes and carry 18,000 predominantly. Same as Laura, when we're approached about this, you know, it's just adding physical data to the stuff you are seeing on the ground, but you know, to be able to track your sheep in your office was pretty cool. So we placed some collars, which I don't want to take too much from Sam, on 100 ewes in a paddock that was 12 kilometres from the homestead, and it's the start of where we place all our maiden ewes. So, you know, out of shearing, our ewe weaners are generally pretty flighty and take a bit of settling down, but to be able to see where these sheep were going and the benefit of seeing that was amazing. We one instance there, I was watching on the app and I couldn't work out why they were all hanging so far to the north, and I went for a little ride and we'd copped a thunderstorm out there, so all 600 ewes out of this middle paddock we're all sitting up the north and really not playing the game to our to track them off the water points. But no, it was a very exciting project to be part of. So yeah, that's probably about me. I don't want to take too much from Sam because it's sort of Sam's project, and I was just fortunate enough to have the sheep for him to put the collars on. So that's about me, really.
Awesome, thanks Toby, and we might drag you back for some questions at the end if there's any, but yeah, so thanks for introducing Northwell, and yeah, Sam, if you're ready to go, we'll get you to describe your project.
Yep. Hi everyone, thanks for coming. So I'm an honours student at CDU, and And basically my project was looking at the effect of wind on sheep grazing patterns and in arid pastoral zones, specifically at wind direction and wind speed. The reason I was most interested in this was seeing grazing pressures, especially around water points, and favouring areas such as corners of paddocks, especially where the prevailing winds came from. And then the negative effects on native vegetation and declining land condition. So there was minimal research previously on the effects of wind and sheep behaviour and grazing, but obviously common observations by pastoralists, managers and landowners are that sheep graze and wind, where the wind comes from, creating these hotspots. And until recently, there has been inadequate technology to monitor these sheep movements and see what they actually get up to. So the aim was to estimate the size of the biosphere, so the grazing radius from these water points, but more importantly to explore the relationship between wind direction and sheep grazing patterns, and then determine whether this relationship was then strengthened with wind speed. So additional aims that we'd be looking at was observing the trends in grazing for other environmental parameters such as temperature, so whether they were watering more frequently, rainfall events, how they responded to these, and nighttime events, and tracking them once the sun goes down. So yeah, so the trial was at Northwell Station in Middle Paddock, so approximately 56 square kilometres during March, April this year, where it was obviously quite dry. The beauty of this paddock was it did have a central trough, which allowed for a 360-degree angle for the sheep to explore their behaviours however they deem fit, and then cross-reference this with weather conditions. So the technology we used was the movement cattle tags, which you can see in the first picture. They're a little solar panel cattle tag that goes on the ear, which we attached to these ewe lambs with PVC collars with a little bungee strap. So if they got stuck, they could get free without too much stress. And then these tags talk to the movement rack, which you can see at the top of the pole in the middle picture, which was powered by the solar panel at the bottom there and had its own little battery. This operates off a satellite or 3G, 4G network, whichever is available in the area. And then we have an on-site weather station, which wasn't far from the rack unit, which allowed us to get very localized weather information. The rack unit goes 8-kilometre radius, so that covered the paddock with ease. And the issue, so with these tags, you do need to charge them for a minimum of 7 days, probably 14 at best. They do need 4.1 volts to transmit the information from the tag to the tower. So yeah, they do take a fair bit of power and yeah, full sun. So the wool probably got in the way a little bit if they slid down the side of the neck on the collars. So with full sunlight, they can ping up to every hour, probably would be the maximum. And then we were only successful sort of getting a location data every 1 to 3, probably averaging 3-hour intervals due to these low battery issues and not having enough power to transmit to the unit. They are a relatively easy system to use and install. It's pretty much just plug and play, and they sync up to the unit pretty much straight away, but they do take a few weeks to really sync up to the right satellite and get really accurate location data. So we did a bit of a syncing from the tags to the unit prior to Northwell Station to make sure they were talking to each other properly. And then this information goes onto the movement app, and the website, the app was not the best. It was a bit delayed and faulty in comparison to the website, which had a lot more accurate information and updates on the animal location. So overall, it would be worth trialing again on shorn sheep or shedding sheep, just to eliminate that the wool factor and better charging of the tags. So we are still analysing the data. However, preliminary data analysis looks like there is a good relationship with wind direction and where the sheep were grazing. And the results, and this was definitely strengthened with wind speed. So yeah, the wind speed really strengthened this relationship. And results will be available on the Landscape SA website later in the year when we finalise all the data. And from this, we are hoping to be able to provide livestock producers and landowners with information on how wind influences grazing patterns, specifically implementing into infrastructure upgrades, so installing new water points. So if it deems like it is a strong relationship between where they're grazing and the wind, maybe installing water points not in direct line of, so if you've got a prevailing wind in the southeast corner, maybe not installing a trough directly there, maybe moving it up the paddock a bit more, basically just taking into consideration what the wind's doing. Or if you rotationally graze, possibly implementing grazing management plans, such as if seasonal changes in wind direction, using paddocks with waters on the opposite sides to just promote sustainable grazing management in considering the effects of wind on what the sheep are doing. And that's all from me.
Fantastic, Sam, and thanks, Toby. That was a really great overview of your trial, and we really look forward to hearing your results, Sam. We now have time for questions. There's nothing in the chat, but there is a little, you'll see a little picture of a little hand, and it might say raise next to your icon. If anyone's got any questions, please pop your hand up, and we will open the floor up for questions. Or also feel free to use the chat if that's what you'd like to do, type your question in. I'll just give everyone a couple of minutes to collect their thoughts. While we're waiting for any questions, I just wanted to mention that last week was the International Rangelands Congress, and it was hosted in Australia, in Adelaide. And some of you online were lucky enough to attend. It was an amazing collection of speakers. And one thing that was highlighted to me was the importance of inviting researchers to engage in our industry and in our region. And I think what we've seen tonight is an exemplary example of that engagement. And I really commend the research that Megan, Sam and Bianca have undertaken, a lot of it off their own bat, and really looking to support our industry in our region. So thank you so much for that. There's a question here from Jill. Go ahead, Jill.
Yeah, thank you. My question probably to Megan, maybe. What do you think? Do you think it's possible that it will be I guess the word legal for virtual fencing or the tags to be used in South Australia, or what are your thoughts? Do you think it's close by or not happening at all?
Yeah, so in terms of the regulations, the government has committed to allow virtual fencing. So you may have seen in Parliament, I think it was a few months ago now, there was a bill put forward to change the Animal Welfare Act to allow virtual fencing, and that was not passed. So that made the news, and a lot of people did see that. But what that actually meant was, because the legislation sits between the Act and the regulations, and so the Act is you must not do this or this or this, and the regulations say, except for this, or, you know, in this instance or whatever. So it's kind of, they work together. And so what was not accepted was changing the Act, which would allow any electric shock device to be used on any species in South Australia. Instead, the Minister for Agriculture said, no, we're not going to do the Act, but we will change the regulations and we will do it prior to September 2026. So yes, it will happen, and it will happen sort of in the next 18 months. There'll be like a consultation phase and everything else that needs to happen. In terms of sheep and ear tags and all of that, sheep are further away. So a change would allow for cattle in the first instance, because we've got devices for them, and we kind of know how it all works, and there's a clear commercialisation pathway there. For sheep, they're not quite there yet. So there's still a lot of tech development to be done. A specific sheep device needs to still be developed. I have no idea of timelines on that, but I would hope, and my gut feeling is sort of like within 5 years we should have something that can be deployed in sheep, but hopefully sooner. We'll see.
Yeah, thanks for that. So do you think that sheep would still have the collar, or are you saying that they would use, say, the ear tag, or do they have to have the collar? Because I guess it has to give them that cue. I don't know how to work in their ear.
Yeah, so there is, so obviously a collar, so we have, you know,
Okay, Megan's frozen up for a bit. Sorry, Megan. I'll wait for you to come back on. Laura, if you're online, there's a question here for you. Did the stock come from the water point originally, and which direction which direction did they move on to the water point?
I might go through steps.
Yeah. So no, the stock didn't come from the water point originally. They come from one of our southern, like right down the bottom end of our property. And so the 100 ewes were then it was just a random selection from the 100 dry ewes. Sorry. And then we just then trucked them up to the training paddock, and then they were just trucked back up to, which was about 5 kilometres from the training paddock to where the actual virtual fence was at the dam. And so percentage of mob tagged, does that mean that, so it was just 100 ewes, we didn't have any more. It wasn't like there was 500 ewes and then 100 got tagged, but there was, like I said before, there was some challenges because of the rain, and so other sheep moved through that didn't have collars on. So that definitely put a lot of pressure on the ewes that did have the electronic virtual fence on them. And how long was the training period recommended? Yeah, it was 4 weeks, but definitely I think some trials need to go for longer than that to get some better data for sure.
Thanks, Laura. Welcome back, Megan. Thanks for everyone for persevering with the tech. Megan, just following on from what you were talking about before, you were talking about the consultation phase and the change in regulations being later in 2026. So for the producers that are online tonight, what would you recommend? Is there scope, or would you recommend that producers maintain contact with the state government or lobby to make sure that progresses, or is it pretty much the momentum's happening now?
I would suggest if producers are really keen to put forward their use case, or like really hone in on the value that it holds for their particular business or their interest, I would suggest that like Livestock SA is probably a good point of contact. They are your industry body, and it's their job to lobby for you. So they're a really good point of contact as well. That none of this review into the regs sits with PIRSA. It's actually within the Department of Environment and Water. So, and PIRSA can't lobby. You know, we're an independent body. So, PIRSA are an independent body. So, I would say, like, I can see Anne's put a comment in there. Livestock SA have done a lot of lobbying, sort of probably over the last 10 years. They've been really active in that space, but they're the ones that you should, really, really go to. And then through your livestock consultants and things as well, just drumming up that interest too. And I mean, completely, as a independent person, you could write to the minister if you really wanted to as well.
No worries, thanks, Megan. There's our call to action. Do we have any more questions as we wrap things up? I think Laura might have touched on it, Megan, but what is the recommended training period for stock when you first put the collars on them? What would be the ideal length of time?
Yeah, anywhere, or the literature sort of shows on average 3 days is what it takes for a mob to sort of learn to an appropriate level to then be put out into a management system. Most of the suppliers they'll have their own guidelines. So if you purchase a technology, a particular brand, they'll say, this is our protocol. So this is how you have to do it, and they'll work with you to implement it. It's usually sort of 4 to 7 days. And it's exactly what we did at Pernatty. It's implementing it in a really simple way in a smaller area and giving them not much of an exclusion zone, so that if they do get out, they don't go completely AWOL, they tend to come back in. And I had one other thing to say there, but it's gone out of my head. Sorry.
One more question's just come in about if you're aware of any trials being done just on a beat or a pulse in electric fence, moving to just beat.
There has been some work in Europe trying to develop a virtual fencing tech that does just use like a series of beeps, vibrations, things like that to avoid the pulse, because obviously that's the hold up with animal welfare regulations, is that pulse. But I think like the common finding there is that it's obviously not as effective. Like that follow-on cue from the audio needs to be aversive enough that the animal doesn't want to feel it again. So that's what makes it so effective, and that's how animals learn. On average, it's like two or three combinations before they've actually learnt that association when everything's working right. So it's doable, but it's just nowhere near as effective. And I don't know that it would be hugely commercially applicable to do it that way. But who knows? Like it could be something that people continue to look at, and it could improve over time.
Great, thanks, Megan. Jade just mentioned too that at the International Rangelands Congress last week, she saw a presentation from Texas using herd instinct tags. It wasn't found to be successful, greatly successful yet, but it's a work in progress. Charmaine, we might send you a link to some of that work as well. Okay, I think I reckon we might leave it at that. If anyone would like to get in contact with Bianca, Megan, or Sam to ask further questions about the trial, please reach out to me and I can connect you up. As I said before, it's just so fabulous to have young researchers wanting to help solve complex problems in our rangelands. So I really commend the work that Megan, Bianca and Sam are doing, and also that of their supervisors to help support their projects. A big thank you to all the families and staff at Northwell and Pernatty too. Without your involvement, we wouldn't be progressing with trialling new technology and really challenging the status quo and working forward as a viable and sustainable industry in an amazing part of South Australia. So thank you everyone who's been involved. And thank you to everyone who joined us online this evening. If you would like to get a copy of the recording to share with family members or business associates, please reach out to me. You've got my email, or give me a ring and I'll make sure you get the recording. So I think unless there's any other mad hand waving, I reckon we will close it there. So go well, everyone. Hope you get some rain and we will see you next time. Let us know your ideas if you've got some great ideas you'd like to hear of next. Cheerio.
Thanks all.